Welcome to my weekly podcast, Later That Same Life. I'm Larry Fedorik. Thank you for supporting this podcast over the last few months.
Season 3, Chapter 8. Happy New Year!
I had a plan for this episode. I wanted to sit down and write a year in review, looking back at the year that was. I think we all do that in our way, as directed by the calendar. Ring out the old, ring in the new. That was Tennyson who said that, by the way. I looked it up recently. Personally, I prefer observing New Year's on my birthday. To me, it's a more individual and private time to reflect on a year that's passed, as opposed to the obligatory en masse countdown and piss-up at the end of every December. No disrespect intended if your actual birthday is near the end of December. You got to double up. That's okay. It just reminded me, I had a dream once that I would meet a girl whose birthday was February 14th, and we'd get married on Valentine's Day, thereby knocking off 3 special occasions in one fell swoop, one day each year. Never happened. Where was I? Oh yeah. Either way, here we are at the end of the calendar year, and we can't help looking back. As we closed 2020, I know there was a lot of people who didn't want to look back. They just wanted to forget 2020 ever happened. Good riddance. Let's just focus on 2021. And now, in a flash, that year is over too. And I'll bet many of us feel the same way about this year. What's to review? Top stories this year are COVID, and COVID. Well, that's partially true, but I am going to attempt a quick review just the same. It's not going to be in-depth or comprehensive, but a look back, 2021. As 2020 may have been all about COVID, I think the top stories of 2021 are COVID, climate, supply chain, and democracy. First of all, think about this. It has been almost a full year since the January 6th riots in the U.S. Capitol. That kicked off our year. In December of 2020, we were starting to get vaccines. Trump was out. The world was beginning to exhale a little bit, albeit through a mask. And then this. Armed insurrectionists, egged on by an outgoing president and his idiot minions, smashing doors and breaking windows, calling for the death of people like Nancy Pelosi and even Mike Pence. Welcome to 2021. I remember that day well because though I watch a lot of news, that morning I decided to shut everything off. Go out for a long walk. Didn't even take my phone with me. Even when I got back around mid-afternoon, I decided not to turn the news on or open up any news web pages or even visit any social media. Eventually I said, well, I'll just turn on CNN for a few moments just to catch a few headlines, just in case anything happened, and I saw it. I was in disbelief, at least at first. But then the more I thought about Donald Trump, the more real this thing became. See, America, this is why you can't have nice things. A national embarrassment for the United States. And through the year, we continue to get daily updates, including the current January 6th Select Committee investigating the events of the day. Many participants have already been charged and some sentenced for crimes committed. Joe Biden hadn't even been sworn in yet. That would happen 2 weeks later. And it ended up giving us an hilarious Bernie Sanders meme. Sanders, at the inauguration, sitting on his chair all bundled up in a parka. That image. Even later that same day, we began to see Sanders sitting everywhere. On the couch at Central Perk with Ross and Rachel, on a bench next to Forrest Gump, on classic album covers with Crosby, Stills, and Nash, and hundreds more. It was a riot. And one of those rare times when social media can actually be fun. Note that one of the people who found this the funniest was Bernie Sanders. He immediately sprung into action. He had t-shirts and sweatshirts made up with his seated likeness, raised millions for charity through their sale. We assumed, although incorrectly, that the U.S. could work through their own politics. The rest of the world had the pandemic to think about. With 2021 came vaccines. How do we get one? Where do we get one? When do we get one? Will there be enough to go around? Which one should I get? We had Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, and Johnson & Johnson. While Russia had the Sputnik, and China had the Sinovac. India eventually got one called the Zy-Cov-D. And much later, trials began in Canada on something they had developed called the PTX COVID-19B. There were fears of blood clots with the AZ. And then we had to decide if we could mix different vaccines, because we needed 2, and then 3, at least for starters. Maybe we'll get another one every 6 months for the rest of our lives. We'll see. All those leftover anti-vaxxers began to grow in number. I assume previously many of them were simply anti-maskers. They took it up a notch. They not only disregarded restrictions, but they protested healthcare workers. And I assume in their spare time licked public doorknobs. We had a COVID Alpha variant, and then a Delta by the end of May, and in November, the Omicron.
I'm running out of time, every day goes by so fast. And every moment counts, baby, I don't want to miss a thing.
As I said earlier, I do watch a lot of news. It's what I do, it's what I've always done, and I think it's important. Every day it's filled with COVID and the pandemic. News has almost become a disservice. The glut of information has become part of the problem. It circulates regardless of distancing.
Scientists are still battling against the death toll rise.
Yeah, I get it. Disinformation and bad actors are a problem as well. But news organizations today are at the very least lazy. Hey, what do we do today? I don't know, just cover COVID. They cover COVID and politics like there's nothing else going on.
A White House spokesman declined to comment on whether or not this was a terrorist attack.
Now, news is negative by nature. As we used to joke, you'll never hear a headline that starts with, "This just in, plane lands safely." And I don't mean that news should be all sunshine and roses. Just report the good things and all those quirky little funny stories. No, not at all. But the way it is now, it's just too much. For one, real journalism and reporting is very expensive. A lot of times budgets just aren't there. And due to corporate greed, local news gathering has all but dried up. So it's all national reporting, and they must make everything very important. Everything becomes a major issue. News is either broke, stupid, or lazy. Some days all three.
Authorities are working on a plan to contain the outbreak.
What they have to do is start questioning their role in world events. Well, maybe they started, but they have to do it more. In physics, it's called the observer effect, the disturbance of an observed system by the act of observation. It goes on to say that this is often the result of instruments that by necessity alter the state of what they measure in some manner. Camera, microphone. Not only should they be asking these questions, but they should be reporting on them. Listen, it can't be easy to be part of a major news organization these days. CBC, CNN, New York Times, et al. And I'm sure there's people in these organizations that realize they are part of the problem. But today, when reviewing the top stories and the top issues, you always have to add massive media to the conversation. Otherwise, you don't have a real conversation at all. There are almost 200 countries on this planet, but 165, depending on the day, are governed by some sort of democracy. Well, democracy is doing fine then by the numbers, right? Yeah, well, hold on. About 35 are Democratic, but 2 of them happen to be China and Russia. Another one is North Korea. What they lack in size, they make up for in crazy. The other issue is the nation that has always tried to be the beacon of democracy for the rest of the world is the United States of America. Picture cartoon thought bubble with the word eek. No doubt democracy is under attack. Nevertheless, Canada did have an election this year. Nothing really changed, well, except for the federal Green Party imploded. Otherwise, status quo. Democracy still working in Canada, mostly, at least federally, and for the time being. I've discussed democracy and these issues at length in previous podcasts. What else happened this year? Oh, yes. Climate. Big story. Huge warnings. Our time is up. Or it's just our 19th nervous breakdown. The COP summit in Glasgow saw many of the usual suspects waxing eloquently about how the time for action is now.
So if we're honest with ourselves, yes, this is going to be really hard. The thing we have going for us is that humanity has done hard things before. I believe we can do hard things again. If we pledge to do our part and then follow through on those commitments, I believe we can secure a better future. We have to. I'm ready for the long haul if you are. So let's get to work.
And then it was over, and it wasn't on TV anymore. And people just went right back to complaining that there wasn't enough cheap gas for them to drive their SUVs to Walmart for the Black Friday sales. Yeah, climate change, how bad is it? At the end of June, the town of Lytton, BC, burned up. Gone. And it wasn't the only one. Many of the people who had to evacuate BC's interior barely had a chance to get back home when they had to evacuate again because of the floods. Massive freak tornadoes ravaged many U.S. states, wiping out entire towns in places like Kentucky. I remember the day after the devastation, CNN spent an entire half an hour covering live the next Bezos Blue Orbit flight, including a long sequence of what we assumed to be Michael Strahan's vehicle pulling up to the launch pad. If I was a Kentuckian, I'd be pissed. Hey, we got people dying here. Why are you covering another TV host going up on a free flight to the atmosphere? Are you lazy or stupid? By the way, personally, I'm not against the private corporate exploration of space. Branson and Bezos were a nice distraction this year for a bit, as was Elon Musk hosting Saturday Night Live. I don't believe that exploring space and helping the planet is an either-or. There is enough money and manpower to do both. We just don't. As a matter of fact, all these new billionaire space barons, it's like we've given up on Earth. It's no longer a fixer-upper. It's a teardown. So in the meantime, we got to find somewhere else to live. Also this year, one of the top stories was the disruption of the global supply chain. As I said in another previous podcast, who even really knew much about it until it stopped working? You know what the biggest problem with the global supply chain is? The global demand chain. Everybody wants everything when they want it. And if possible, I'd like to pay less. So that was our year, basically, right? COVID, climate, supply chain, and democracy. As I said, this wasn't meant to be in-depth or comprehensive. But those are the highlights, are they not? For myself, in August, my previous podcast series, I Was 8, won the Canadian Podcast Award for Best Personal Series. It's Canada. I'm damn proud of it. But in this country, recognition does not lead to fame and fortune. I'm sure you have had your own personal highlights as well. But overall, 2021, I don't think it was the year many of us had hoped for at the end of 2020. I still have high hopes for 2022. I really do. Even though sometimes I feel like Costanza, remember? I think it's the hope that's killing me.
Hope is killing me. My dream is to become hopeless. When you're hopeless, you don't care. And when you don't care, that indifference makes you attractive.
So hopelessness is the key.
It's my only hope.
A lot of 2021, and even the previous 9 months, happened in a blur. My concept of time got screwed up. What day is it? There were moments, absolutely true. I actually typed into Google search, today's date, please. I think Google appreciates it when you say please. Also in play is the fraction theory. I believe in that. The older you get, the faster time passes because it's a smaller fraction of your life. In kindergarten, a year is like 1/5 of your life. When you're 50, a year is 1/50th of your life. What goes by faster, 1/5 or 1/50th? P.S. I'm not 50, just a number I picked. The restrictions, the isolation, throw in semi-retirement, really messes with the passage of time. How am I running out of this bottle of 60 one-a-day vitamins when I just bought the thing last week? Oh, wait, that might have been October. January 6th riots were like a year ago? What? How? When? You know, I wanted to close this episode by going through a list of people we lost in 2021, you know, in Memoriam. And I said to myself, be sure to include John Prine. You love John Prine. He died in April of 2020. In my mind, it was like 2 months ago. Listen, I do want to go through this list of people we lost in 2021. I verified that it was 2021 for each of them. It's a long list, but still only a partial one. And it comes with this disclaimer. The world has lost about 5.5 million people to COVID. And by highlighting a celebrity list, I'm not implying that these lives are in any way more important than any others. They are not more important. At best, slightly more noteworthy. People who became famous, or at least more well-known than others. And usually we note their passing because through their efforts, they gave us some entertainment, some pause, or were some influence on us by their existence. Many of the deaths were not covered because people talked about COVID in politics. A lot of these deaths were not COVID-related, and the list is not in any kind of chronological, alphabetical, or order of importance or anything like that. It's just a list. I know all of these names, and amazingly, a little bit about each person. But I won't stop and explain who each person was. That would take too long. If you don't recognize a name and you're curious, I'm sure you will just Google it. Make sure and say please. Here in Memoriam are some of the noteworthy people who passed in 2021. Anne Rice, Michael Nesmith, Peter Scolari, Ed Asner, Charlie Watts, Don Everly, Marky Post, Biz Markie, DMX, Dusty Hill, Ron Popeil, Ned Beatty, Michael Constantine, B.J. Thomas, Clarence Williams III, Gavin MacLeod, Charles Grodin, Tawny Katane, Tanya Roberts, Olympia Dukakis, Jessica Walter, Yaphet Kotto, Willard Scott, Rush Limbaugh, Bernie Madoff, Larry Flint, Phil Spector, Christopher Plummer, Cicely Tyson, Cloris Leachman, Hal Holbrook, Dustin Diamond, Larry King, Jackie Mason, Jerry Marsden, Gregory Sierra, George Siegel, Michael K. Williams, Stephen Sondheim, James Michael Tyler, Peter Aykroyd, Tommy Lasorda, Hank Aaron, Mary Wilson, Prince Philip, Colin Powell, Bob Dole, and Norm MacDonald. Again, lengthy, but still a partial list. And if I missed one of your favorite people, I apologize. Here's another name, Adam Duritz. He's still alive, frontman of the band called the Counting Crows, and their song A Long December, in which he sings, "There is reason to believe maybe this year will be better than the last."